When you treat someone with disdain, especially if it's because of a difference in appearance, then one day that person may show all their strength and skills, leaving everyone wondering how it happened. Bob Thomas, a soft-spoken 14-year-old African-American student, had always found solace in the gentle harmonies of music. For the past 6 months, he had attended the music classes at Midtown Middle School in Atlanta, a place where creativity should flourish. Yet every visit to Mrs. Ellen Smith's classroom felt like a trial. Mrs. Smith, a stern woman with a cold, unyielding demeanor, was notorious for her prejudiced attitude. She rarely called on Bob, ignoring his often raised hand, and her dismissive eyes seemed to say that he didn't belong. The classroom itself felt timeless. The old wooden benches creaked under the weight of years of students, and the sharp smell of chalk mingled with the faint aroma of lukewarm coffee that lingered in the air. The walls, adorned with posters of classical composers and inspiring quotes about music, contrasted bitterly with the tense atmosphere that had taken root among the students. Whispers and sideways glances passed between the white students, whose barely concealed smirks betrayed their complicity in Mrs. Smith's bias. Bob sat quietly at his desk near the back of the room, his worn notebook, his closest companion, open in front of him. Over the months, he had painstakingly scribbled down melodies and practiced quietly in the confines of his modest home on an old keyboard that once belonged to his aunt. Despite his unassuming nature, a spark of determination flickered behind his dark eyes, a secret he guarded closely from those who doubted him. One afternoon, the tension in the classroom reached its peak. As Mrs. Smith launched into a discussion of classical music, her voice dripping with condescension, she suddenly fixated on Bob. With an icy glare, she interrupted the conversation. "Bob, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate what you can actually do?" she sneered, her tone heavy with sarcasm. "Maybe you'll play something on the piano, if you're capable of it." Her words cut through the murmurs of the class like shattered glass. The room fell into a heavy silence. Bob's heart pounded loudly in his chest as every eye turned toward him. The other students exchanged knowing smirks while the teacher's mocking laugh echoed in the cramped space. It was a deliberate trap, an attempt to humiliate him in front of his peers. Despite the inner turmoil and the sting of the humiliation, Bob's face remained calm as he slowly rose from his seat. His legs felt heavy, but he moved with a quiet dignity that belied his anxiety. Each step toward the far corner of the classroom, where a battered old piano sat under a soft beam of light, felt monumental. The sound of his footsteps on the creaking wooden floor, the rustle of loose papers as classmates fixed their gazes upon him, and even the faint scent of chalk intensified the moment. The piano, Bob paused. The silence was almost deafening as he sat on the worn bench, his fingers curling lightly over the keys. For years, he had practiced in secret, learning to play not for applause or recognition, but simply for the love of creating music, a talent he had kept hidden behind his quiet exterior. Now, confronted with the sneers and ridicule of Mrs. Smith and his classmates, the time had come to reveal his gift. With a deep, steady breath, Bob sat down and placed his fingers on the keys. The first tentative notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the room. In that instant, as his music began to pour forth, the entire atmosphere shifted. The whispers subsided into awe, mocking smiles faded, and even Mrs. Smith's smirk wavered into uncertainty. Everyone in the room was entranced by the delicate yet powerful melody that seemed to transform the stale air into something almost magical. At that pivotal moment, when Bob's fingers danced gracefully across the piano and his soulful interpretation swept through the classroom, the stage was set for an unexpected reversal of power. It was the beginning of an extraordinary transformation that would not only challenge the prejudices within that small classroom, but also ignite a spark of hope for those who had been dismissed and underestimated. Bob Thomas took a steadying breath as he pushed himself up from his desk. The murmurs and suppressed laughter of his classmates rippled through the room like a low, constant tide. His heart pounded in his ears, but his expression was resolute despite the weight of every mocking glance. With slow, determined steps, he began his journey toward the old piano standing in the far corner of the classroom. a battered instrument whose faded keys had seen more hopeful attempts than formal recitals. Every step on the creaking wooden floor echoed his silent defiance. The classroom, suffused with the aroma of chalk and time-worn wood, seemed to hold its breath. Even the ambient hum of whispered conversations paused as Bob moved toward the instrument. The atmosphere was charged with an unspoken promise of change. His every move was observed. His white classmates exchanged looks that blended disbelief and anticipation, while others maintained sympathetic silence. In sharp contrast, Mrs. Smith, seated at the front of the room with her customary austere gaze, sneered openly. "Come on, Bob," she drawled loudly enough for everyone to hear, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe you'll surprise us all with something even half-decent on the piano." Her words cut deep, designed to humiliate him in front of everyone. A few of her friends in the front row snickered, the sound like shards of ice breaking the tense silence. But Bob's quiet determination did not waver. He had experienced enough indignities to learn that silence was not submission. It was often the fuse that ignites brilliance. He had spent countless hours after school practicing on his aunt's old keyboard, the melodies of Beethoven echoing in his mind. Every note he had learned was his own secret triumph against a system that had tried to keep him marginal, to stifle his potential under the guise of discipline. As he reached the piano, all eyes in the room turned toward him. The instrument, though worn, beckoned with a kind of somnolent majesty. Bob paused for a moment at the foot of the bench, noticing the heavy, expectant silence that had settled over the class. The tension was almost palpable. Even the scratch of a distant chalk mark on the boards seemed to fade into the background. Mrs. Smith's eyes glinted with malice as she leaned forward, a dismissive smirk on her face. "Let's see if you can actually do something," she hissed under her breath, though loud enough for nearby students to catch her scornful tone. Her voice was laced with a bitter, condescending humor, the kind that elevated her own sense of superiority above Bob's unspoken worth. Bob exhaled quietly. His hand trembled momentarily as it reached for the piano bench, but then he steadied himself. He remembered the notes he had practiced in the quiet corners of his home, the hours spent learning Moonlight Sonata on that old keyboard, perfecting each phrase and nuance as if every musical rest were a pause in his struggle. Today, every teasing word and every dismissive glare would be answered by the music itself. He sat down slowly, the worn leather of the bench creaking softly under him. The classroom fell into a deep, expectant hush. Here, in this moment, when all the ridicule and oppression converged, Bob's resolve crystallized. His fingers hovered just above the cold, faded keys, illuminated under a single beam of light that seemed to spotlight not only the instrument, but his very spirit. A murmur of anticipation rippled through the room as Bob closed his eyes for a brief moment, centering himself. Slowly, deliberately, his fingers pressed onto the keys, releasing the first tentative notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The sound, soft and luminous at first, began to resonate throughout the classroom, carrying with it the weight of years of unspoken defiance, and the promise that true talent can emerge even in the harshest of conditions. As Bob's fingers began to glide over the keys, the atmosphere in the classroom shifted dramatically. The first soft, tentative notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata emerged, almost like a gentle whisper against the harsh echoes of earlier derision. Instantly, the ambient chatter and murmurs fell silent. Every eye, from the mischievous glances of his classmates to the disbelieving stares of those who had once sneered at him, was riveted on the sound now filling the room. The old piano, though battered and worn, responded tenderly to Bob's touch. With each note, his inner turmoil and years of quiet practice poured forth in a melody that was as delicate as it was powerful. The melody began slowly, a melancholic introduction that conveyed both longing and resilience. In that musical moment, Bob transformed the oppressive tension in the room into something ethereal rather than oppressive, a declaration of his inner strength. In the front row, Mrs. Smith, who had once disguised her prejudice behind sneers and dismissive laughter, found her composed mask slipping. Her eyes widened with disbelief as the haunting beauty of the sonata seeped through the classroom. The teacher's face, usually so confident and scornful, grew pale. The sneers that had earlier been aimed at Bob now faltered, replaced by a perplexing mixture of shock and aversion. For a moment, even Mrs. Smith's lips twitched in uncertainty as she attempted to process the unexpected talent unfolding before her. The classroom itself seemed to hold its breath. The creaking of the old wooden desks, the faint smell of chalk dust, and the lingering aroma of stale coffee all faded into the background, overshadowed by the mesmerizing performance. The gentle, rhythmic pulse of the piano filled every corner of the room, weaving through the air like a tapestry of hope and defiance. Bob's performance was not merely an escape. It was an act of silent resistance to years of dismissal and prejudice. As his fingers danced confidently across the keys, a transformation took place within the students. The skepticism and amusement from some turned into respectful silence. Whispers that once carried mocking tones melted away in response to the rich cascade of notes. Every delicate phrase of the sonata, every carefully articulated pause and crescendo, seemed to command a newfound respect, inviting even the harshest critics to listen with rapt attention. At the far end of the class, a few students who had earlier exchanged giggles now simply stared, their eyes glistening as if seeing Bob for the first time. The emotional weight of the music transcended any petty judgments. Bob's eyes were focused on the keys, his expression serene, nearly meditative, and for those few precious minutes, he was entirely in his element, a young maestro reclaiming his dignity one note at a time. The camera of a hidden phone, held discreetly by a sympathetic classmate, captured every delicate nuance of Bob's performance. The raw emotion, the graceful determination, and the palpable sense of release fused together into one stunning moment of triumph. As the music soared, Mrs. Smith's earlier ridicule vanished like mist in sunlight. All that was left was the undeniable power of truth expressed through art. Just before the final, powerful refrain of the sonata could complete its course, Bob's fingers lingered on the keys in a frozen moment, a pause pregnant with possibility. The classroom, now awash in an almost sacred silence, awaited the final note that would seal his profound victory over prejudice. Bob's performance reached its climactic end. The final notes of Moonlight Sonata reverberated gently, lingering in the charged silence of the classroom like an echo of triumph. For a brief moment, time itself appeared to stand still as the last chord faded. Then, as if a window had been flung open, the transformation became undeniable. Profound hush gave way to spontaneous applause. At first, a tentative clapping started at the back of the room. Soon, it swelled into resounding, heartfelt cheers. Students who had once exchanged sarcastic glances now showered Bob with admiration. Faces that had been filled with scorn or dismissive amusement now shone with awe and newfound respect. In that instant, the oppressive atmosphere built by years of disparaging remarks and isolation was replaced by unity and celebration. Bob slowly lifted his hands from the keys, his fingers still trembling from both the adrenaline of performance and the emotional weight of the moment. He surveyed the class with wide, steady eyes. For him, this wasn't merely a musical recital. It was a personal victory against prejudice and an affirmation of all the years he had spent practicing in solitude, hidden away from a world that had too often overlooked him. Across the room, Mrs. Smith sat rigidly. The usual sneer on her face had vanished, replaced by a look of speechless disbelief. Her eyes, once sharp with condescension, now betrayed a confusion mixed with faint regret. In that moment, she had no words. The classroom's slow, persistent clapping contrasted sharply with her muteness, a silent admission that the performance had dismantled the authority she once wielded with cruelty. A few students, previously dismissive or distracted, began murmuring amongst themselves, voices low as they debated the significance of what they had just witnessed. "Did you see how he played?" one whispered, while another replied, "I never knew Bob had it in him." The buzz of chatter was palpable, every comment a small revolt against the bias that had plagued the class for so long. Bob, still seated at the piano, allowed himself a moment to close his eyes and savor the applause. Every sound, the rhythmic clapping, the soft cheers, Even the occasional sniff or gasp was a validation of his hidden talent and a powerful rebuttal to the years of condescension he had endured. Deep inside, he felt a quiet surge of pride. Finally, he had turned the silence of despair into a radiant symphony of respect and possibility. As the applause gradually tapered, the atmosphere in the room shifted once again. The oppressive tension that had defined earlier classes began to dissolve, replaced by an air of hope and camaraderie among the students. Whispers of admiration floated in the air. Even those who had once been complicit in the ridicule now wore expressions of remorse and longing for redemption. In a nearly inaudible voice, Bob murmured, "This is for all of us." His statement, simple yet powerful, resonated deeply with many in the room. For the first time, the classroom was not just a place for routine lessons but a transformative space where a quiet young man could rise and claim his dignity on his own terms. Mrs. Smith, still seated at the front, avoided eye contact with Bob as she quietly resumed her paperwork. Her silence was more damning than any reprimand. Here, in the very space where she had sought to demean him, authority had been upended. The power dynamics in the classroom had irrevocably changed. Bob's final act, his performance of Moonlight Sonata, had not only left an indelible mark on those present, but had also planted the seed of change in the hearts of his peers. His quiet strength and exceptional talent had redefined their understanding of merit, turning what was once a stage of humiliation into a platform for hope. In the days following Bob's breathtaking performance, news of his Moonlight Sonata mastery spread like wildfire throughout Midtown Middle School. What began as hushed whispers in crowded hallways soon transformed into loud, admiring chatter in every classroom. Students who had once snickered now looked at Bob with newfound respect, and even those who had never given his quiet presence a second glance were now eager to tell anyone who would listen about the astonishing recital they had witnessed. At lunch in the crowded cafeteria, groups of students animatedly discussed Bob's performance. "Did you hear him play?" one student exclaimed, while another added, "I've never believed that Bob had it in him. He played like a true musician." The bittersweet irony was not lost on Bob, who trod the hallways with a mixture of relief and surprise. In the midst of this adulation, he began to receive unexpected invitations. A flyer posted on the bulletin board of the school music room announced auditions for the newly reformed school band, and several teachers approached him to personally express their admiration and encouragement. Even Mrs. Smith, whose harsh treatment had marked Bob's earlier experience in her class, was whispered about nervously by her colleagues. None dared to confront the undercurrent of change now visible in the air. Some said that parental concerns about her conduct had begun to circulate. For many students, Bob had become a symbol of triumph over unjust dismissiveness, and his quiet stand at the piano had reversed the power dynamics in the class altogether. Back in the music classroom where the performance had taken place, a group of students, inspired by the transformative moment, gathered near the old piano. What was once seen as a relic of neglect now sparkled with new promise as they discussed forming a club dedicated to music appreciation and performance advocacy. Within hours, an unexpected buzz spread on social media. A video taken on a classmate's phone, showing Bob's soulful playing and the stunned silence that followed, went viral locally. The hashtags #BobRises and #MusicWins began trending among the school community and even caught the attention of local news stations. At a school assembly held the following week, the principal warmly congratulated Bob on being an example of resilience and talent, emphasizing that every student should be allowed to shine regardless of their background. "Bob Thomas," the principal announced to a rapt audience, "you have shown us that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most powerful melodies. Let this be a lesson in perseverance and belief in oneself." Later that day, as Bob sat quietly in the now buzzing music room, a result of his unexpected acclaim, he was approached by the advisor of the school music club. "Bob," she said softly, "we've been watching you closely, and we'd be honored to have you join our club. We believe your talent and spirit can inspire others to speak up for what's right in music and beyond." The invitation felt like a validation not just of his musical gifts, but of his inner strength in the face of adversity. Amid these celebrations, Bob found a quiet moment for personal reflection. He recalled the many hours spent alone, practicing on his aunt's old keyboard at home, the countless moments of loneliness and quiet determination. His performance in class had been more than just a recital. It was an act of resistance against years of ridicule and injustice. He now saw that the power of music was not solely in the notes played, but in the hope it could inspire and the barriers it could break. Walking slowly through the hallways, with congratulatory pats on his back and warm smiles lighting up the corridor, Bob felt a mix of relief and cautious optimism. He knew that challenges still lay ahead, but that day had marked a turning point. His courage had sparked a change in the classroom and beyond, a sign that no voice could be silenced forever when truth and talent prevail. In the weeks that followed Bob's breathtaking performance, the echoes of that transformative day reverberated far beyond the confines of his middle school classroom. The viral video of his rendition of Moonlight Sonata became a symbol of resistance against prejudice and a testament to the power of quiet courage. Within Midtown Middle School, Bob was no longer seen as the overlooked boy in the back of the class. Instead, he was celebrated as a beacon of hope and talent. His name was mentioned with respect in hushed conversations in the hallways and loud cheers during school assemblies. At a special school assembly organized by caring teachers and administrators, Bob was called upon once again. The principal took to the stage with a proud smile, declaring, "Today we recognize Bob Thomas, whose performance reminded us that greatness can rise from the most unexpected places. Let his courage inspire every student to push past their limits and embrace who they truly are." The entire auditorium erupted in applause. His classmates, many who had once giggled and whispered during his challenges, now offered sincere congratulations and patted him on the back. Even Mrs. Smith, the once harsh and prejudiced teacher, cast long, remorseful glances, but said nothing aloud. Later that day, as Bob sat quietly in the school's music room, the very room where he had once been marginalized, he reflected on the journey that had led him to this moment. The sound of the distant piano and the soft murmur of a class practicing a gentle melody provided a peaceful counterpoint to the memories of ridicule. He remembered spending countless hours practicing in solitude on his aunt's old keyboard. Every note played a silent protest against the world that had once underestimated him. In that private space, the seeds of his talent had taken root. Today, they had flourished into something that could not be ignored. Sitting there, Bob realized that his quiet resilience had sparked a broader change. His performance had changed not only how his peers and teachers viewed him, but had also stirred a community-wide conversation about the value of every individual voice. Local news outlets picked up his story, and soon, invitations started pouring in, offers to join the school music club, opportunities for scholarships in music, and even mentorships from professional musicians eager to see what he could do. In his quiet reflection, Bob thought, "My music has become my voice. It was never meant only to fill the silence. It was meant to shatter it." His thoughts turned to the many students who still felt oppressed and overlooked, and he silently promised himself that he would use his newfound influence to uplift others. As the final school day of the term ended, Bob walked home with a renewed sense of purpose. The campus had transformed. The once hushed halls now buzzed with hope. He glanced at his phone and saw messages of encouragement from former classmates, teachers, and even strangers who had come across his performance online. The overwhelming response reinforced one profound truth: talent, persistence, and authenticity always find a way to shine through the darkest of times. In his bedroom that evening, with a small keyboard in the corner and posters of Beethoven and other great composers decorating the walls, Bob composed a simple message in his journal. A message for himself and for anyone who ever doubted the power of perseverance. When you are faced with injustice and doubt, your voice may be quiet, but it is powerful enough to transform your world. Keep playing, keep fighting, and never let anyone silence your song. Bob closed his journal, a peaceful smile crossing his face. His journey from the shadows of humiliation to the bright spotlight of recognition had only begun. A journey that echoed the timeless truth that every voice deserves to be heard. What do you think is the most powerful element of Bob's journey from silence to triumph? Have you ever experienced a moment when your hidden talents shone through against all odds? Write your thoughts in the comments, We'd love to hear your perspective. I hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a comment, sharing your thoughts about it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new and equally exciting stories. See you in the next video.